everyone, and welcome back to Emkin Gardening. Today we're going to be doing a very special project that we have been anticipating for quite a while, and that is setting up drip irrigation in our front yard. So we're hoping to get as many of the flower beds in our front yard as possible. We only have one water access point on our property, and we do share that with the hose link. The hose link is attached to it right now. And the hose link does cover and water everywhere on our property. The hose is like 96 feet long and it will get everywhere. Back at the garage, all the way to the driveway, front yard, all the way back by the Hicks U, everywhere. However, it is very time consuming hose watering every day, especially in the heat of the summer. So we're hoping to eliminate a little bit of that by having some drip irrigation going in the front yard that we can just turn on and just use the hose link for the rest of the property to save time. And drip irrigation is really great at saving water as well if you can manage it correctly. So we have a variety of supplies in front of us, and we will be going through all of them with you. But we just wanted to let you know that with irrigation, with drip irrigation on whatever property size you're using, it's always kind of a rule of thumb to know that it's going to evolve and adapt and change because your flower beds are evolving and adapting and changing. So where we set it up one way right now, we may find ourselves updating it in June when we plant more things in that spot that need water access points to them. So while we are going to set up the bare bones of it today, I know in my head that looking forward, it is going to be changing a little bit based on what we have planted there. So let's get into what we have. So we have opted to use across the board 1/4 inch tubing, especially when considering the width of our flower beds. They are pretty narrow in size because they're kind of just bordering the property in the front. So we didn't want to get like a big chunky irrigation tube that was going to take up a lot of the planting space that we needed. So we opted for the 1/4 inch. It is quite little, but here's an example of what it looks like. And we have 3 different types of tubing that we're going to be using. The kind of blanket overall tubing is this distribution tubing. It's also a 1/4 inch and it's just a black line of tubing. And I think we got 100 feet of just blank distribution tubing. We're going to be using this a lot for corners and to bridge the gaps between each flower bed to allow the water to go through. But we're also able to use this specifically for individual things that we want watered. So for example, we would have this blank line of distribution tubing. We can use our cutter. This is a specific tubing cutter that pokes a little itty bitty hole, not all the way through on both sides, just one side in there. And then you can get a little bit of tubing that goes to your spot and then connect it to an emitter. So this would go in the ground and the tubing would connect right there, and you could place this directly where you wanted a plant to be watered. For example, the spot behind me that has our lilac bushes and our quince, as of right now, that's the only thing that's here. So it wouldn't make sense for us to put irrigation tubing with holes every 6 inches because it's just going to be watering the grass and the weeds that are here. So instead we would run that blank distribution across this, cut a hole, get a tubing piece that goes straight directly to that plant, and then this little sprinkler like flow would happen to water those plants individually. So that is our 100-foot blank distribution, no holes. We're going to be using a lot with the emitters. And then we have 2 other distribution tubes, both at 1/4 inch. One has 6-inch emitter holes, and we got a total of 150 feet of that type of tubing because that is the most I think we're going to be using, like in our pine tree bed behind me and the crabapple bed, as well as the big skinny front flower bed that we have and our weeping cherry bed. There's a lot jam-packed in those beds, so it makes sense to have very tight holes admitting water because it's going to reach all of the plants evenly, and it would be not as smart to try to individually admit to all of those plants. So you kind of have to see what your options are, what you're working with, and plan ahead on what you know you're going to be planting as well. So we're mainly going to be using the 6 inches for those emitter holes on our tubing. So an example is for right here, you can see every 6 inches, there is a little hole that's going to be distributing water on both sides of that. So this is going to be the bulk of what we're using. But we also have a 12-inch emitter hole tubing as well. So this one is a lot further apart. Also on both sides. And we only got 50 feet of this because I kind of got it as a secondary just in case. I really do think the bulk of it that we're going to be using is the 6-inch emitter hole one, but that's okay. We have extras just in case. So the other things that I wanted to point out to you supply-wise are the kind of adaptive equipment. So these are used predominantly for irrigation. You have a cross, a T, an elbow, a coupling, and a end stop. And there's a ton of them in here. I don't remember how many, but I think it was like around 250. I could be wrong. We're going to link all of this down below for you to check out. Plenty of options. But these are going to come in really handy when we're doing our design because there's a lot of corners in our square front flower area. So we're going to be using a lot of these elbows, I think, and a lot of the couplings to kind of connect the two tubing pieces together when we run out of the 50-foot ones each. So this is going to be super handy. We're going to be using these a lot. They are fitted for a 1/4-inch tube, so they're going to be nice and small. So the last thing that we got were actually landscape staples. Now this is to make sure that our tubing is not bouncing around or moving around when we don't want it to, because that is going to take away that water from that spot that we need it to be to water the plants. I got 12 inches for landscaping. The other option was 6 inches, but I just didn't think that that was going to be long enough. It's kind of, that front flower bed especially is kind of in a raised bed situation, and it's not really raised that far off the ground. So I didn't think it was going to really be that secure. But basically how we're going to be using these is periodically while we're forming it and kind of modeling it to the design that we want it to go, we're going to put down these landscaping staples into the ground to keep it nice and secure, exactly how we want it to be watering. It's going to help out so much to have these in the overall process of putting in our irrigation system. So the very last piece of equipment that we have are some faucet adapters. So obviously this tiny little tubing going into a faucet hole is not going to work. So they came up with all of these adapters. This is a 1/4-inch adapter. So we can screw this onto our regular faucet and connect it with all of these different parts. It's going to connect and fit nicely with our 1/4-inch tubing. There's this little bolt that you can tighten around it. We'll show a close-up of it when we put it together. But we have on our faucet a Y valve that splits the water access. So on one of the split, our hose link is already set up, and we just turn off the access to the other one. That way water flow doesn't go that way at all, ever. What we're going to be able to do now is put this adapter on, and when we're using the hose link, we'll turn that valve on so the water access can go there. And when we're irrigating the front yard, we'll turn off that one, turn on the one that's linked to this, and have the water flow into the front yard. Going along the same lines of how we know that we're going to have to adapt our design and kind of go with the flow once we plant more and see how everything's going, how it works. That's going to be the same way when we're experimenting with how long to run our irrigation. I want to probably start with 20 minutes and see how soaked everything gets. if I notice after 20 minutes it's just really not getting into the soil that much, we'll bump it up. Or if we get to 20 minutes and it's like, wow, everything's pretty good and soggy, we'll bump it down the time limit. You can also get really cool faucet adapters that have timers on it that you can like even use on your phone sometimes too, to like set a timer for a certain amount of time. So maybe down the road, we will change that Y valve system into some kind of Y electronic tech thing. But until then, we're going old school, using the Y valve, using this to connect it to a 1/4 inch tube. So let's get a close-up on how to put this together.
So the wonderful thing about our hose link setup that we did last year is how easily we can dismantle it and put it back together. So right now we're trying to show you how to assemble the emitter tube to snake under the deck and go through the garden, but this isn't the way to show you. So we are going to take that off and we're going to show you how easy it is to do. Simply lift up. It's got this great handle right here, and it mounts with this pipe right here that fits right into the diameter of the steel pipe that I put in with a cement base last year, and that stayed level all year, which is really nice to see. This has been mounted for about a week since we started doing our gardening. It's been perfect. All right, so they give you this plumber's tape. It's very thin. This can help thread the connector and prevent it from, you know, seizing up with like our city water. Is really not the greatest, and there can be a lot of corrosion on these threads at the end of the summer. I should actually take this whole thing apart and do this to the other parts, but this should help prevent that from happening on this, which will increase the longevity of our products, which is less money. Okay, so as you can see, we've got this Y splitter. They have them at any hardware store. We got this one at Home Depot. Definitely take this off during the winter. I did not the first year, and that's how I found out we needed to do that every year. The way this works is we have our main valve coming from our water line in our house, and you have these two shut-offs right here. So having these up shuts the water flow off from both spots. Now, I've got this connected to our hose link, so when I turn that down, the water flow is now going freely through the hose link. Turn this off, and now we've got it going through there. And this is where our emitter is going to be connected to. So when we are ready to set it and forget it for our emitters in our flower garden, I will push this down. It will flow freely through that. And I'll put this up because the pressure actually suffers if you have it going through two at the same time. Okay, so here we have our main emitter tube. We're gonna snake this right underneath our deck stairs here. There's a little space right there, and there's also space on the other side. Okay, now we're going to put the nut through the end of the tube. And once we get this on, what this is going to do is we're going to screw this onto the tip of this emitter connection. And once it's there, we'll screw it on, and that'll really clamp this down. It's going to fit right over this. And then we're going to push this down and secure the tube to the Y-axis. And now we have our connection point.
Okay, now that we have it connected to the faucet and underneath the stairs, we're going to start the process of designing our new irrigation system. Here we go. very quickly lost light. We did make it around with the distribution black cord around that corner area by just staking it in. It was super easy to stake in. And then we used a T-connecting piece to start our kind of 2 rows of those 6-inch apart emitters. We got around the pine tree bed and then started to go through the crab apple and down the front flower bed when we realized that we were not going to have enough light to finish this project. So this is going to be a part 1, and in the part 2 video, we'll be able to give you close-ups on how we staked everything in, specifically where we put the emitters so that they were close to the root ball of the plant, so you can kind of see that spacing, as well as why we chose the 2 rows that we did. We're also going to show close-ups in part 2 of the emitter holes from the black distribution cord. So stay tuned for part 2 when we have sunlight again. But it was a very easy process, and we're looking forward to being able to have this completed. It's going to be super fast when we actually are able to do the part 2 in sunlight. This part came really quickly anyway, so it's gonna be a piece of cake. But we hope you stick around. If you liked this video, give us a thumbs up, comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe to Emkin Gardening. We are going to link all of our supplies down below in the description box if you wanted to check them out before part 2 comes out. Have a great weekend, and we will see you for part 2 next week.